On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks go up to Milwaukee and have a competitive environment for sure. They were still in the game down the stretch. The Hawks were right there on the doorstep, but ended up falling a little bit short against the Bucks. The Bucks remain undefeated, by the way, at this stage. But plenty of takeaways from this one. Trae Young was brilliant. Defensively, the Hawks had some issues throughout the contest. We'll have the full coverage, as we always do on the podcast, as well as some broad takeaways and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1338 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep into the night on a Saturday evening into Sunday here in late October. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered the season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And I also want to encourage you to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out at the Locked On Hawks podcast across podcast platforms, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and also on the video side over on YouTube. Today's episode will be breaking down the Hawks' narrow loss in Milwaukee on this Saturday evening, a final score of 123-115. It was actually closer than that into the final seconds of this one. Obviously not the best performance necessarily for the Hawks, but the way that I would put this very simply is that the Hawks go in to Milwaukee. They have a difficult matchup, and they performed reasonably well. Now, were they perfect? No, they were not. But this is not a loss that should inspire panic. In fact, it's the first loss this season for the Hawks that is having this takeaway. The first loss the Hawks had against the Hornets was a bad performance. It was a bad loss. This is one where it just kind of happens. You're playing against a good team on the road. It's back and forth. They didn't play an A+ game, but the Bucks, losing to the Bucks in narrow fashion on the road is a totally acceptable outcome in a lot of different ways. So I'll break down what transpired in this one, but that's kind of the broad takeaways from this game is that Trae Young was fantastic. The offense kind of did his job for most of the game, but defensively they had a couple of shortcomings, and that was what doomed them in this spot. But we'll get into the game as we always do here. Pre-game-wise, not a whole lot has changed for the Hawks. Injury-wise, in fact, nothing has changed. Bogdanovich was the only guy who missed this contest for Atlanta. It's important to know that both teams were on the second night of a back-to-back, and if you missed it, I broke down the Hawks' win on Friday in Detroit on this same podcast, as well as a win on Wednesday in Detroit. We had Tyler Jones on the podcast last week. It's been a very, very busy slate of games and podcasts in this space, but both teams played on Friday. The Bucks did not have to travel, though. The Bucks played at home on Friday, so a little bit of an advantage there on top of the fact that Milwaukee's playing at home, so keep that in mind. Injury-wise, though, the Bucks actually are a little bit more shorthanded than the Hawks are. Obviously, Bogdanovich is a notable loss for Atlanta, but Chris Middleton remains out for the Bucks, an all-star level player on the wing. Also, Pat Connaughton, a rotation guy for the Bucks, still out. Joe Ingles, who they signed in the offseason, is still out as well. So a little bit of an advantage there for the Hawks, especially with Middleton out of the lineup. But the Bucks remain the only undefeated team in the league, even after tonight. They're now 5-0. They were coming into the night number one in defense. So keep that in mind as the Hawks really played well on offense in this game, especially when you take into account the Bucks are really, really, really good defensively, but still not quite enough. And BetOnline actually made this game, the Hawks, as a 5.5-point underdog at tip-off. And down the stretch, it seemed like the Hawks were going to cover this one. And at the very end, they let go of the rope a little bit. So if you were on the Hawks, my apologies. Definitely not the most fun loss in the world at the end of this one on the spread perspective, obviously, versus the total perspective on that stuff as well. So we'll get into the game now. But even that should tell you that the Hawks were, for the first time this season, underdogs in their first back-to-back, all that fun stuff. So not exactly an embarrassing result on the whole. As for the game itself, we'll get into what transpired here. For the most part, the Bucks led for the lion's share of the game. It was kind of a disjointed start. The teams missed a combined 7 of the first 8 shots. Only 2 total points for these two teams in the first 2.5 minutes of the game. The Hawks had the first run, actually, though. It was a 9-2 run to go up by 7. Trae Young got going in a hurry, cooking Juwan Carter a couple times. There was one in particular that made the rounds on Twitter. It was kind of just had him in a blender necessarily. The Hawks they had 3 of their first 4 shots from three-point range. Rotationally, nothing really surprising at all. In fact, it was kind of the carbon copy for the Hawks in this one. We'll come back to it later on. AJ Griffin played a little bit in the second quarter, but it was Capella coming out early for Okongwu, then coming back in with Trae Young. It was the same guys that usually play for Atlanta. Justin Holiday, who was better in this game, Aaron Holiday, and then obviously the depth of Jalen Johnson as the backup 4. Trae was getting to the rim at will in the first quarter. The defense was definitely struggling a little bit, but Trae made his first 5 shots at 13 points in a hurry. Milwaukee is usually a good matchup for Trae. Not always. Milwaukee is a good defensive team, but Trae really does well against drop coverage. Talked about that a lot in the last couple of years, even dating back to the playoff series 2 years ago. But Trae is comfortable against the Bucks defense. Now, Milwaukee kind of plays that math-based defense where they kind of cut off the rim and they let you take threes and all that stuff. But Trae against the drop coverage is very difficult to stop, and he was definitely in a groove for the majority of this game. But the first run by Milwaukee was a 13-0 push in the first quarter from Milwaukee, and they led for basically the next 2.5 quarters straight. Brook Lopez was red hot for Milwaukee. He made his first 5 shots, including 3 threes. That's of course, their 7-foot center. The Bucks had 9 assists in the first 9 minutes of this game. The last one was pretty brutal because Capella had actually had a great block, and they couldn't get the rebound, leading to a 3 for Milwaukee to kind of capitalize on that 13-0 run overall to go from down 3 to up 8. The Hawks were only down by 2, though, at the end of the first quarter, and Trae had 17. He was brilliant in that first quarter, but the Hawks, as they were the entire game, offensively, that was not really the problem. It was the defense. They had a 128 defensive rating in the first quarter, and Giannis only had 2 points. The Bucks were still losing because the Bucks shot it well from 3. They were 4 of 8 from 3 with 10 assists in that first quarter. As for the second quarter, AJ Griffin came in to start the second quarter. This time around, if you missed it on Friday, Griffin did play in the first half against the Pistons on Friday, but he played a little bit later in the second quarter. This time around, he was slotted at the start of the quarter with the Murray plus bench unit in place of Justin Holiday. He played a long stretch. It was his longest stretch as a pro so far, at least in a competitive portion. Played about 5 minutes. That was all he played in the entire game. It looked fine. He wasn't like super duper aggressive, but certainly is not shy about letting them fly. Did take 2 shots, missed both of them, but that's not a huge surprise. Had one crashing, impressive offensive rebound actually from the weak side. That was good to see. Jalen Johnson, I thought, was better in the first half. In the second half, he had a very nice jump shot, about an 18-footer. That was good to see. Okongwu had a great help side block against Giannis. A lot of young guys doing little things that were impressive in that first half. It was mostly Johnson on Giannis during that stretch, but it was a little bit of Okongwu as well. They were down 8 at the half, though. The Hawks were not playing fantastic basketball at times in that second quarter. The bench units were not like super effective in this game. And the offense was fine, generally speaking, in the first half. It wasn't fantastic. Trae cooled off. The one time he was not really cooking in this game was in the second quarter, and they were not efficient from two-point range. They did hit 6 of 12 from 3 in the first half, but not great process. We'll come back to this later on, but the Hawks took a ton of mid-range attempts. And I'm not trying to pick on that every night, but this is arguably the starkest it's been the entire season so far. The Hawks just didn't get the rim very much at all in this game. Did take a lot of threes, took a lot of long twos, a lot of floater range shots, and then also only had 7 assists in the first half. That's a very low number for this Hawks team. Defensively, same kind of story as it was the entire way. The Bucks had a offensive rating well into the 130s in the first half. This is the crazy part. Jrue Holiday and Giannis Antetokounmpo, they're 2 best players right now with Middleton out, and obviously Giannis is, in my mind, the best player in the world. I said that on Twitter on Saturday and got some pushback. I'm okay if you want to pick somebody else, but I think Giannis is the best player in the league. It's not really a controversial opinion either. He's really, really, really good. You can say he's not the best offensive player for sure. I think you'd rather have guys like Jokic and maybe even Trae on offense, but Giannis's defense kind of puts him in a different category in some respects. But anyway, he's an awesome player, but Jrue and Giannis were 3 of 16 from the floor in the first half, and the Hawks were losing. Not a great situation there. Lopez hitting 5 threes was a big part of that. And just as a note here, Lopez was being guarded by John Collins for the most part. There was a lot of focus on both, especially Capella, but even Okongwu as well, for kind of quote unquote letting Lopez get loose. One thing here, number one, the Hawks will take Brook Lopez shooting threes. Now he's a good shooter. That's worth noting, but that's one of those make or miss league kind of things. You kind of have to let Brook Lopez shoot some threes. And generally speaking, Capella was guarding Giannis for the most part, as was Okongwu for a lot of different parts of the game. So the Bucks are a different matchup. You don't usually put your center on Brook Lopez necessarily, especially if you can have a guy like wall up against Giannis. So keeping that in mind, Lopez got off in the first half, but it wasn't like anybody's fault necessarily. Just one of those things. And also the Hawks only forced 3 turnovers in the first half. That also led to a little bit of leverage for the Bucks offense in this one. Okay, before we get to the second half, as we always do, as sort of our thorough accounting of what transpired in this game, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline, and the NBA season is rolling along with action each and every night. Football is also in full swing. It's a fantastic time of the year to be a sports fan, and BetOnline is the number one source for all the betting needs that you might have this season in the sports world. Find all the latest developments, the game matchups, the news, and the podcast at BetOnline. And BetOnline is a continued source for wagering information in the sports world. That includes live betting and esports and live scores. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on anything that you want to in sports world. It's just a fantastic overall option. On this show, we focus on the NBA heavily, of course, and there are plenty of NBA offerings still at BetOnline with game lines and props every night. Future bets are still available on who's going to win the East and the West and the NBA title and the awards and all that fun stuff. And elsewhere, BetOnline has odds and lines on college sports and, of course, football. They have baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, tennis, auto racing, horse racing. They have soccer, entertainment bets, and much more. Head to BetOnline right now on your mobile device or your computer to check out all of what is offered there and learn more about all of the trends and the action in the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, and the third quarter was pretty close fought. In fact, the Hawks lost the second quarter by 6 points. The rest of the game, the first quarter was decided by 2 points. The third quarter was decided by 1 point. The fourth quarter was decided by 1 point. So basically, the only sort of lopsided quarter in the entire game was the second. And the Hawks won the third quarter, actually. It was back and forth for a while in the second half. The Bucks led by as many as 12 early in the third quarter at one point when Drew and Giannis finally got going a little bit, made some jump shots. Giannis was getting to the rim a little bit more as well in the second half. The Hawks did hang around, though, a couple nice finishes from Trae Young and DeAndre Hunter at one point. Congo had kind of an interesting sequence where he had this borderline illegal screen that was a really good seal to let Trae get to the rim. That was helpful. But the next possession, he got called for an offensive foul for a moving screen. It was probably the right call, but it's kind of one of those things where like moving screens are often not called, and when they are, it can be frustrating. I know Kevin Chouinard talks about this a lot. Kevin is definitely an arbiter of the moving screen in a big way. I don't want to talk about that a ton, but that was one of those just situations where like you never know what's going to get called in the NBA circles. Trae, though, was very quiet in the second and was not quiet at all in the third. He had a logo style pull-up three to get the Hawks back within 4, like 3.5 minutes to go. There was one really bad mental error by Capella. I know I'm definitely higher on Capella than most, but this was a bad moment for him. He bit on a Giannis pump fake from 3 and got a foul as a result of that. That one just cannot happen. Giannis taking a 3 is a great result for the defense, especially if he's like semi-contested. You just do not want to jump on Giannis jump shots, especially from 3. That was a bad moment from Capella and a bad time. He did have a nice end of the quarter in the third with a tip in and then a block at the very end of the quarter, basically at the buzzer. That was a glaring mistake from Capella defensively. The Hawks were down by 7 at the end of the third, only won the quarter by 1, but Trae had 16. So if you're scoring at home, 17 in the first quarter and 16 in the third quarter from Trae, that's pretty impressive. But the Hawks only won the quarter by 1 point, so that's not necessarily great. Defensively, they got better in a few different areas, but Drew and Giannis getting going was not what the doctor ordered for the defense, and they lost a couple of cutters as well for some easy buckets in the third. In the fourth, the Hawks were down by 10 with 10 minutes to go. So it was basically, they were losing this game, as I said before, like basically from like the middle of the first quarter to the middle of the fourth quarter pretty decisively, not like hugely, but like in that 8 to 12 to 6 to 14 range. And then a big stretch actually was Justin Holiday. Now, Holiday has had a bad start to the season as a shooter in particular, and he was due for some positive regression, but he hit 4 jump shots in about 3.5 minutes to start the fourth quarter, 2 of which were threes, and cut the deficit down to 3. So basically the Hawks go from down 10 to down 3 almost entirely on the strength of Justin Holiday shooting jump shots. That's a reminder that, by the way, for a 6-season sample, that's a very, very large sample in the NBA. He's a 37% three-point shooter. So I know there was a lot of panic about Justin Holiday not being able to make some shots early in the season. He's been bad so far as a shooter, no question about that, but this is a reminder that he can make shots. Like, he's not a knockdown guy like Edger Griffin is, but he can shoot, and that's a reminder of that. Rotationally, again, there was just the same 9. No Griffin in the second half of this one. They waited a little bit longer than I thought they probably should to bring Trae and Collins back in the fourth quarter. It was not egregious or anything like that. And Congo played for a long while in the fourth before they brought Capella in. All that was fine too. Like, I could see arguments for Capella versus Congo down the stretch. I don't think Congo was like firmly outplaying Capella, nor the other way around. So I definitely understood that on all sides, but I thought that they probably waited a little bit too long for Collins in particular because Jalen Johnson was struggling in the fourth quarter. But anyway, worth noting there. It was a long scoreless stretch in the middle of the third quarter on both sides. It was 196 for a while, like 2.5, almost 3 minutes. And then Giannis missed 2 free throws in that run. It was just kind of stagnant there. And from there, like a lot of play-by-play, I'm not going to do the entire thing for you, but there was that silence of offense was broken up by a absolutely monstrous putback dunk by Okongwu over Giannis that almost killed my friend Bob Rathbun on TV. You never hear Bob go that crazy very often, and that was a lot of fun to hear him kind of react to that one. If you didn't see the replay on that one, find it somewhere on Twitter or elsewhere. That was a massive dunk by Okongwu to get the Hawks back within 2. And they sort of dodged the ball a little bit after that with a blown defensive rebound. The Bucks missed an open 3, and then Murray got back to the rim, I should say, cut the lead to 1. And it was really back and forth from that point forward for like the last 5.5, 6 minutes of the game. In fact, Trae scored on back-to-back floaters to tie the game with about 4:40 to go when the Hawks have been losing again for about 2.5 quarters straight. From there, it was like a lot of back-to-back and back and forth kind of stuff on both sides. Giannis had a huge dunk that was definitely noteworthy, to be sure. On that play, by the way, Collins and Okongwu kind of botched a switch, allowing Giannis to get downhill, which is bad news for everybody. And after that play, actually, it was when Nate went to Capella. I'm not sure that was the plan all along, but that was maybe why he was frustrated with Okongwu in that moment. Trae hit another huge three from like very deep to give the Hawks the lead for the first time, and that was only the second lead change of the entire game. But basically immediately Giannis scores to kind of have the third lead change of the game, let's just say. Trae finally missed one, but from there, basically, it's almost important that I do some play-by-play here. So Giannis to Brook Lopez for a bucket, and the Hawks are down by 3.5 minutes to go or so. Trae kind of lost his legs a little bit, I thought, down the stretch after he was fantastic for most of the game. Had some kind of maybe tired attempts. I'm sure he wouldn't say that, but just a little bit of short stuff, both in the rim and also from three. Murray had a nice floater to get back within one with like 2.5 minutes to go. They fouled Drew back. Basically, it went from like 1-3 to 1-3 for a while. There was a great drive and finish by John Collins, who wasn't great in this game. It was a really good finish by him around the rim. There was a moving screen call on Brook Lopez. That was a big call, and John kind of sold it. That was the right move by him. He played well down the stretch. Trae took a pretty bad long two that he missed, and then Drew Holiday missed one right back to have the Hawks only be down by one. And then there was another questionable shot by Trae. I'm not trying to pick on him because obviously he was a big reason why the Hawks were in this game, but Trae struggled down the stretch, I thought. Definitely one that he can make, but it tracked as a 31-footer. I thought he was pressing a little bit, trying to kind of make those hero shots that he is capable of making, but he missed 3 Trae shots there. None were fantastic looks necessarily. And then Giannis gets the ball, gets a putback, and the Hawks are down by 3 with 1:15 to go. Out of a timeout, DeJounte hits a nice, like, beautifully under control 15-footer that's just like a pro shot from him. Great shot there. And then Giannis, though, hit a very tough fadeaway off the glass. That's one of those shots, if you watch it back, like no one's going to stop that. Giannis, at his size, taking like a 17-footer off the glass. What are you going to do, basically? And Trae then got his best possession in the final 3 minutes, basically. A nice pull-up as well that he made. And then a great defensive play by Collins to close the space on Brook Lopez and force a timeout with like 9 on the shot clock late in the possession for the Bucks. But then Drew hit a tough floater in the middle of the lane to go back up by 3. And basically, Drew was great in the second half. He was 9 of 10 from the floor after that bad first half for Milwaukee. And then came to be the most memorable play of the game, unfortunately, for Atlanta. So with 23 seconds to go, the Hawks call timeout, down 3. That's a reasonable timeout, but it's their final timeout, which is noteworthy for a couple of reasons. Out of the timeout, a very questionable offensive foul call. Now, we don't have the benefit, as I'm recording this podcast, of having the last 2-minute report by the league. I've seen the replay a few times. Nate McMillan was asked about this after the game, and I'll share his thoughts with you in a second. But originally, broadly speaking, there was a foul called on the Hawks on the inbounds pass with the ball. I think everyone thought it was on Trae originally because Trae got ran over on the play by Wes Matthews. It was actually called on DeAndre Hunter. And Hunter maybe gave like a shove a little bit. That's not a play that you really ever see called. I will say Wes Matthews definitely sold it. Like he kind of like did the whole veteran thing as he should. That's part of the deal in the NBA. And he sort of ran Trae over, kind of fell over Trae. They both went down. And it was a very strange call, let's just say. I don't think it was like the worst call I've ever seen. But A, that's not a call that's favorable at all. And B, there was no way to challenge it because Nate had no timeouts left. So it was kind of the perfect storm for the Hawks. It was a questionable call, to be sure. I think it was the wrong call, to be very clear. But not being able to challenge it, just a bad break in the moment. Then they had to foul after that. They had to foul Drew, who made 1 of 2 to go up by 4. Then actually missed the second one. Bucks get the rebound. They had to foul again, and suddenly they're down by 6, and basically the game's over at that stage. Then they turn it over. They got a run out dunk, and it goes to 8. So the last 20 seconds were kind of just a mismatch. Once they had to foul Drew down 3, you're obviously a huge underdog. And I'll say this: I do understand the outrage on the foul call, although I will say it was like a little bit split. People were like more frustrated with the Hawks, and else there was people that were like really mad about the call. I totally get all that. I'll just say this for the sake of being level-headed: the Hawks are still down 3 there with 23 seconds to go. You are still a very big underdog in that spot. Now, you have Trae Young, you have DeJounte Murray, like those guys can make a shot and you tie it and you go to overtime or whatever. All fair. But it wasn't like the Hawks were down 1 or even tied or something like that in that spot. They were down 3. Like they were big underdogs. I'm not gonna say that didn't change the game. It definitely changed the game. Now, did it lose the Hawks the game? I wouldn't go that far, but at least worth noting that they were losing at that stage. But still a frustrating call and a frustrating way to end the game. And by the way, Nate was asked about the call after the game. He basically said that he had not seen the replay yet and did not see it live because he was trying to watch the whole play. He thought basically Trae got run over in real time, but he definitely just didn't answer the question for the most part. Trying to avoid the fine there is the right decision for sure. But it's one of those things where it's a call that's maddening. I don't want to spend more time on it than I have to, but it does kind of just leave a sour taste in your mouth, given what happened, because it's not a call you see very often, especially when it was on Hunter and not Trae. Like sometimes you get that sort of block. It wasn't like a true block charge, but off the ball, like you get tangled up and it kind of goes either way. But the fact that it was called on Hunter for the shove on Wes Matthews made it a little bit strange. That's for sure. Okay, from there, the takeaways from this game are endless. Basically, I could do a whole segment on this, basically. But I will say this. I thought it was a defensive first loss for the Hawks, that was definitely shown in the numbers, as well as if you watch this game back. The offense was pretty good in this one, which we'll come back to. But the Hawks had a 124 defensive rating in the game. And if that's all I told you about this game coming in, is like, all right, the Hawks go to Milwaukee and they allow the Bucks to have a 124 offensive rating. I would say the Hawks lose that game, let's just say more often than not, and very much more often than not, like 80-20, 90-10 kind of thing. Milwaukee did win the turnover battle and the rebounding battle, not by a lot, but those are not edges for the Hawks. Like the Hawks are often in a good position, especially in turnover battle. They did not win it in this one. That's at least notable. The Bucks took almost double the free throw attempts, which I know Hawks fans were mad about that for officiating purposes. But Nate McMillan said after the game that he didn't think the Hawks got to the rim enough and created enough free throw attempts. I think it's somewhere in the middle. The Hawks didn't get a super friendly whistle in this game, but they also weren't as physical at the point of attack as the Bucks were. Also just worth noting, Giannis and Drew went nuclear in the second half to kind of neutralize what Trae was doing. And rebounding was an issue at inopportune times. The Hawks did do a good job on Giannis, I thought, for the most part in this game. And they protected the rim very well, by the way, as far as the center position was concerned. Like a lot of blame, as I said before, on Capella and Okongwu. Not really what I saw on tape. I think it was more like point of attack stuff. And there was some bad rebounding moments for the Hawks across the board in this one. But the Bucks made a bunch of threes too. And the Bucks, if they make threes, someone who's watched this Bucks team, watched Mike Budenholzer teams for a long time, if they shoot 39% from three on good volume and get to the line a lot, they're going to win most of the time. That's also worth noting in this game. Tough sort of the way that I put on my notes is like a tough combination to beat if they're going to make threes. Offensively, the Hawks were pretty good, honestly. Is that like satisfying? Maybe not. Trae was great most of the night. We'll come back to him in a second, but he was certainly the headliner on offense. But the Hawks had a 116 offensive rating in this game. That's a very good number no matter what the context. But then you throw in it was against the maybe not number one overall in like team quality, but coming in the night, Bucks are number one in the league in defense. It's on the road. It's a back-to-back. And at minimum, the Bucks are good defensively. You may not think they're elite, but they're a good defense. That's a good number in that situation. The Hawks were 13 of 29 from three. That's not a ton of attempts, but if the Hawks shoot that well, they're going to win more often than not. And this game, it just wasn't enough. Now, Nate said, as I mentioned before, he talked about this post-game that he thought the Hawks settled too much and not getting to the rim enough in the game, not getting into the line enough in the game. And that's evident on tape, and it's also evident in the box score. So the Hawks took 15 free throw attempts. That's a pretty low number. That includes 0 in the fourth quarter. That's frustrating. I know the Bucks took a lot of free throws in the second half and a lot of free throws in the fourth quarter. The Hawks had 0. Part of that's just the nature of being on the road, unfortunately. Part of that's also that the Hawks were not getting into the rim. And that's, you have to be able to create free throw attempts. Like, obviously, you have to get calls as well, but you have to put pressure on the officials to actually make calls. And for the entire game, the Hawks only took 18 shots at the rim, according to Cleaning the Glass. 18. That's a very low number for context. They also had a whopping 47 attempts from two-point range outside the rim. So basically from 4 to 22 feet, 47 attempts. The Hawks were leading the league at one point this season so far, like in the mid-30s. So that's a ton of attempts. That's just way too many in that range, even though the Hawks are, as I've been saying for a while, they are built to take a lot of mid-rangers this year. Trae, DeJounte, DeAndre Hunter, even Collins, like they have some mid-range guys, but that's too many, almost certainly. Now, the Bucks do wall off the rim. That's something that the Bucks definitely do, but you want to take more threes than that, and they didn't really do that in this game. The Hawks did shoot well from floater range. A lot of that was Trae and DeJounte, but they also were only 11 of 29 on long twos. So those are the 14 to 23 feet area. Like those are traditionally the shots that you don't want to take a ton of. 29 long twos is a ton of long twos. That's not efficient either. 11-29, is not terrible, but not good either. Anyway, the Hawks also had 19 assists and 13 turnovers. That turnover number is fine. 19 assists is pretty low. So, process-wise, were the Hawks great on offense in this game? No. But Trae was electric, and the Hawks shooting 45% from three. If all you know is Trae's going to have 42 points and the Hawks are going to shoot 45% from three, you should win a lot. But the combination of a bad defense, at least the bad defense by the numbers, and also the fact that they just didn't take a lot of threes and it took a lot of mid-rangers, that's kind of what levels you off there, because the Hawks were only 32 of 65. So like sub 50% on twos, that's a bad number. It's not terrible, but 48% on twos would be like a bottom 5, bottom 10 number in the league on those shots. And that's tough to overcome even when you shoot fantastically from three-point range. All right, we'll have more on this game when it comes to individual players, all that fun stuff. But first, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today. All right, we'll dive in now to the player evaluations. And 10 guys appeared for the Hawks in this one. AJ Griffin was the 10th. He played the least, about 5 minutes of playing time. He finally missed some shots. AJ, after making every shot he took the first few games that he played, was 0 of 2 in this one. He did have one really nice offensive rebound. Defensively, he was not awful, but not great either in his limited sample size. So this is totally fine. Nothing to worry about here for Griffin. He's going to make a bunch of shots, and I'll leave that there for now. Aaron Holiday took a step back after his awesome performance on Friday. He was fine, I thought. 3 points, 2 assists, had a rebound, was pretty good at the point of attack defensively, was -5. The bench was outscored, as a lot of the team was in this game. But there you go on that one. I don't think he was a problem, nor was he a huge positive. Justin Holiday had that great stretch in the fourth quarter when he made 4 jump shots in a row. Did have 4 fouls, 13 minutes of action, but did his job for the most part here. Defensively, I think nobody was great on the perimeter, from Trae to Murray to both the Holidays. Like, it wasn't great for anybody. Hunter especially, I thought, struggled defensively at times in this game. But the Hawks got enough from the Holidays in this game. Especially Justin had his best shooting night of the season. And then Okongwu was good. 6 points, 6 rebounds, and had a block. 2 turnovers, 4 fouls, 19 minutes. That's always been a problem for him. But they were +6 in his minutes. Only DeJounte and Okongwu had the positive plus minuses in this game. There was a little bit of noise there, but I thought Okongwu played well. I think maybe that huge dunk maybe got a little bit too much shine. Obviously, it was a fantastic play. I'm talking about just like as far as like informing his overall play evaluation. He was pretty good in the game. I don't think he was great, but he was pretty good. And then defensively, like, he did his job for the most part, walling up on Giannis, doing what you have to do. So, the bench was not terrible. I will say the one guy on the bench did struggle was Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson, 4 points, did have 4 fouls, 2 assists and a steal, 2 of 7 from the floor, 0 of 4 from 3. Now, I've said this a while. I have to be consistent here. I think Jalen's got to have to shoot threes, and he took 4. That's totally fine. He didn't make any of them. That's going to happen sometimes. I think the problem for me was not offensively, it was defensively. I thought he really had a bunch of mistakes, and that's going to happen. He's a young guy. That's a reminder of why he wasn't playing last year, and that's a reminder of why, maybe a shorter leash this year. 17 minutes. In fact, I think he probably played too much. I think Collins should have been playing more than he did in this one, because Jalen did have a couple of pretty glaring mishaps defensively. To the starters. Speaking of Collins, he was very quiet on offense, only took 4 shots. That's back-to-back games where Collins just was not a huge factor. This is something that just tends to happen for this Hawks team. For whatever reason, they just kind of go away from him. So the first 4 games of the season, the Hawks were really featuring him. He was playing really well, and then now he just disappears. And it's not because he's not the same guy. He always is. The Hawks were running more stuff for Hunter off the ball. They were obviously running a lot through Trae and DeJounte. And I think that Collins just needs to be a little bit more prominent. It's not really his fault. Maybe a little bit of it is, but he has to be more aggressive. I thought he played fine. Defensively, he wasn't quite as good as he had been the last couple of games, because he's been awesome this year defensively. But I would like to see him play more as well. But no huge issues. It just didn't have a great night necessarily. I thought Hunter defensively had some rough moments. Did have 14 points on 12 shooting possessions, 5 rebounds as well for Hunter, but no assists. That's a number that I always track for DeAndre. He has not been a frequent assist grabber this season. In fact, I believe, he came in the night averaging 1.6. So he had 8 assists in the first 5. No, 7 assists in the first 5 games. That's not a good number. In fact, only 4 of them came in one game. So he has had assist games where he's had 1, 1, 1, and 0. Not great. Defensively, kind of shaky as well from him. Not terrible, but he had some problems on the perimeter, especially against Holiday in the second half. DeJounte was good, I thought, across the board. Not like A+, but certainly a strong performance. 21 points, 6 assists, 2 steals, 5 rebounds, not 19 from the floor, but no free throw attempts. Only Trae got to the line more than 4 times, and only 2 guys got to the line more than 4 times. 4 times or more, and it was just Hunter at 4 for 4 and Trae at 7 for 7. The Hawks need a little bit more at the free throw line from guys like Murray, from even Collins, 0 of 2, and no one on the entire bench attempted a free throw in the game. Not what you want. And then Trae. So Trae, as I said before, was really fantastic throughout this one. I thought he pressed a little bit down the stretch, but that's kind of the only nitpick that I would have. 42 points speaks for itself on 32 shots. He was quote unquote only 10 of 22 on twos, which is not a great number, but for him it's totally fine. 5 of 10 on threes, 7 of 7 at the free throw line. He was efficient. He was productive. 5 assists, 2 turnovers, 6 rebounds. Trae's done a good job limiting turnovers this year. I wanted to at least flag that because yesterday we discussed it on the Friday show. He only had 1. He's only averaging, I think it's like 2 turnovers a game so far. Yeah, he had 6 in the opener against 6 against Orlando, and then he had 1, 1, 1, and 2 the last 4 games. So pretty impressive stuff from Trae. Defensively, it's always kind of a mess, as we all kind of expect at this stage. But offensively, he was their biggest driver of offense, and he usually is that. But he was really, really, really good and hard to stop, even when he was kind of not having his absolute best stretch at the end of the game. Anyway, broadly speaking, it was a really good basketball game. Like, the Hawks have not played quality competition so far. Even the game they lost against Charlotte was not good. It was kind of just Hawks playing badly and the Hornets making a bunch of shots. Through the first 5 games, the Hawks had played, in my mind, this is my evaluation, but had played 0 quality teams this year. That changed tonight. It was a really good, competitive, entertaining game on both sides of the floor. Like, just from a neutral perspective, this is a really awesome game to watch. And again, ultimately, a narrow loss on the road against Milwaukee is not a concern for me. The Bucks had home court. They had the advantage with no travel. The Hawks were underdogs for a reason in my mind. They could have stolen the game. They were right there at the end, but not a result to panic about at all. So I know it's not satisfying, and I kind of get made fun of sometimes for being a little bit too level-headed sometimes, but this is one of those games that's like very obviously not one to panic about. Now, if they go out and get blown out on Monday against Toronto, like, that's different. And as I said, in that Charlotte loss at home, that was a dreadful performance last week. But this is one where, like, you kind of just have to say, all right, they didn't play their A+ game. They could have won. They didn't win it. It's what it is. 82 games, and here we are. From here, the Hawks do play Monday. It's Halloween, of course, in the United States. They play the Raptors on the road Monday evening. Another test there. Not quite the same as like a back-to-back against Milwaukee, but the Raptors are pretty good. They are 3-3 this season, and they will actually have the rest advantage. The Raptors did not play tonight, so they actually have Saturday and Sunday off plus home court. That's a little bit of an advantage for Toronto. And they're 3-3. They're 3-3, but the Raptors are basically the inverse of the Hawks so far. The Raptors have played Philly twice, Miami twice, Brooklyn, and Cleveland so far. So basically no easy games for Toronto, whereas the Hawks have had basically 5 out of 6. They're pretty easy games. So interesting test for both sides. Of course, the Hawks and the Raptors were like side by side in a lot of projections this year coming into the season in wins and title odds, all that fun stuff. So a nice sort of neutral battle there in Toronto. And then they will finish off the road trip on Wednesday in New York at MSG. So anyway, plenty to discuss. This will be the last show of, I guess, this last week or the first show this week, however you want to do that over the weekend. But I'll have a new show after the game on Monday, and then Wednesday, and probably a few in between as well. The best way to follow the show is to subscribe to the podcast via your favorite podcast platform, whether that be Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher on the audio side, or Podbean or wherever. But subscribe, download across platforms. That definitely helps the show to have the extra clicks and downloads, as well as on video over at YouTube. That's an audience that we definitely want to grow as well. I'm always told by the higher-ups that YouTube subscriptions and views are very, very helpful. So go ahead and smash that subscribe button and like button on there as well, and comment and all that fun stuff. I really appreciate all the support. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland if you would like to. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll be back with a new podcast after the game on Monday night.